Welcome everyone back to weekly weather updates, and in today's video we're going to have a look at the latest from the live radar, run through the UKV, have a look at the precipitation and the temperature over the next 5 days. So it's raining fairly unsettled in the north, drier in the south, cooler in the north and milder in the south as well. Before, as we head into the weekend and start of next week, it looks like higher pressure will be building in over the top of us and could ridge further northwards, and that's really put a spanner in the works for the longer range models, as we'll see in the second half of the video, where we have been seeing recently the GFS pushing that high pressure all the way towards Scandinavia, pulling in bitterly cold Siberian easterly winds. Now, the other runs over the last couple of days had shown some promise earlier in the week, but the last sort of 24 to 48 hours definitely backing off from that idea, with the higher pressure sat over the top of us or further southwards with a milder, more west to southwesterly flow, but still relatively dry for most. Now, I have been saying I think the most likely scenario is somewhere in the middle, and that is what is starting to evolve. The GFS is still trying to pull in some very cold air from the east, but in this morning's runs it has reduced in its intensities, and the ensemble members have risen in temperature by a couple of degrees, whereas the GM and the ECMWF more on the side of high pressure over the top of us, but more of a cooler slack easterly. So sort of in the middle from what the models have been showing. So for many next week, it is looking likely to be very dry, but pretty cold as well. Dependent on how cold you sort of classify colder conditions, it will be relatively chilly in the day, temperatures around average or below average, with quite cold overnight temperatures, with an inversion taking place. Because as we'll see, the upper air temperatures aren't ridiculously cold, but they're around average or slightly below average for the time of year. So yes, next week will be turning cooler, but we're not expecting anything majorly cold unless that GFS and the last few straggler ensemble members do come off, which I do think is highly unlikely at this stage. So do remember, if you enjoy my videos, make sure you like and subscribe, and remember to follow me on Twitter as well, the link's in the description. So if we do start on the live radar, you can see it is unsettled in the north with quite heavy rain pushing in across northern and western Scotland, but further southwards through most of Ireland, Northern Ireland, England and Wales, and pretty much most of southern Scotland, it is relatively dry with a few areas of thicker cloud and some patchy light rain or drizzle. And this has just been the theme over the last few days. Yes, quite a big weather front in the north, but it's not really stretching further southwards at all. And most areas are staying really quite dry and pretty pleasant, with temperatures getting up towards that 10 to 12 degree mark. Now, recording this video around 11 AM, and if we do put on those temperatures, you can see it is pretty mild. Even over the Highlands of Scotland, we're seeing a lot of blues and yellows mixing in there, again indicating temperatures in the mid to high single digits, and widely where we see the yellow colours down towards 10 or 12 degrees. Really quite mild for early February. But as I said, it will all be changing with a slack easterly flow coming up this weekend into next week, where we'll be seeing cooler and dry conditions for all. Now, if you go to the UKV and have a look at what's going to be evolving over the next 5 days for the precipitation and then the temperatures as well, you can see the weather front spreading through in the north at the moment, and it will continue to linger for many areas across western Scotland through this afternoon into the evening. Overnight tonight is widely cloudy, but all that precipitation will peter out, and into tomorrow afternoon another weather front could push in into the west, but it is again going to be relatively light and patchy through parts of Scotland. But the rest of Friday, not too bad. Some brighter skies in the south and the west, but still a largely cloudy picture. As we head into Saturday, again, pretty cloudy. A weather front spreading in, introducing fresher air as it does, but really only clearing northern and western areas through the day before overnight bringing a bit of thicker cloud and some drizzle as it spreads southwards. And many waking up on Sunday, it will be a dry and pretty sunny day for most of England, Wales, Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland and parts of Scotland. And this is when the high pressure starts to build in. As you can see, into Monday, staying relatively dry and the wind direction is going more from a south or southeasterly as that high pressure builds in, and you can see where the edge of the high pressure is, where this weather front comes and stalls. Put on the mean sea level pressure, you can see that at day 5, a big area of high pressure developing to our south and our east, pushing in and trying to establish itself over the top of us. And as it does next week, it's likely to bring in a slack easterly, still subtle uncertainties in the exact positioning, which will decide the exact extent of any cooler weather and the exact wind direction. But for the time being, it's likely to be parked over the top of us somewhere, and most are pulling in a slack east to southeasterly flow, which is relatively cool for this time of year. Now, if I put on the 2 metre temperatures, you'll be able to see that cool down into the weekend and start of next week. See today, 10 to 12 degrees, really quite mild, even over the highlands of Scotland, and overnight temperatures really still in the mid to high single digits. Into tomorrow afternoon, still 10 to 13 degrees, really mild for early February, with that wind coming in from the west. So yeah, pretty pleasant out there and relatively dry for most places. Into Saturday, still pretty mild, but those temperatures a little bit lower, maybe more towards 8 to 10 degrees. And overnight to Sunday, as that weather front spreads in, it does introduce cooler and clearer skies into the north and west, and widely down towards freezing. And then into Sunday, widely a cooler day, maybe 5 to 7 degrees, more towards average for the time of year, and it sort of sets the trend for a cooler, fresher week. You see most of England and Wales where we have the clearer skies, widely down towards freezing, a widespread frost appearing, and into Monday, 5 to 8 degrees, relatively cool, about around average for the time of year. And you can see into Tuesday, the upper air temperatures aren't ridiculously cold, but under the clear skies, under the higher pressure, widely down towards freezing. And that's going to be the pattern into next week. These sort of coolish days around 5, 6, 7 degrees and overnight frost looks likely to be the recurring theme into next week. Again, can subtly change depending on the exact wind direction and air mass that gets pushed in, but at the moment that is the most likely scenario. Now if you go over to the GFS, which has been continuing to try and put in a bitterly cold easterly wind over the last 24 hours since yesterday's video, and even this morning it still does pull in some very cold air from the east, just not quite as strong. As I said though, I do think the scenario that will come off early next week is somewhere in between the models we're going to be having a look at now, where it will be pulling in easterly but nowhere near as cold as the GFS is showing. So you can see over the next few days, the high pressure ridges northwards into Sunday, and that's really where the uncertainty comes in. The GFS pushes it all the way towards Scandinavia and starts to pull in a slack easterly flow, but it holds on and actually brings in quite a brisk cold air mass from the east there. You can see those greener colours over Europe indicating lower heights and a cold pool pushing in. In the longer range, that high pressure stays over the top of us with relatively cool air, so remaining cold, and then right towards the end of the run, starting to push towards northern areas and could turn even colder with a northeasterly wind there. But again, uncertainties there. And we haven't gone up to the full extent of the run. It's the 6 o'clock run is still rolling out, but anywhere beyond day 10 is very uncertain either way. Now if I do run it back and go all the way to Sunday and put it on the upper air temperatures, you can see a big cold pool out to our east around minus 10 to minus 15 at 850 HPA, and it starts to move into parts of northwest Europe. And into mid next week, we start to put in quite cold air. Look at that, the minus 10 isotherm engulfs parts of southern England. Nowhere near as widespread in terms of cold weather from this 6 o'clock GFS run. It definitely has backed off from that, but it is still producing cold, potentially quite wintry weather as well. So it's not completely gone from the output, but it has moderated it significantly from some of the recent runs. After that, we stay in the cool air mass with high pressure building in before eventually a westerly flow starts to push in. But with quite stagnant air, we would expect it still to be relatively cool towards the surface. Now if you compare it to the EGM, you'll be able to see high pressure is building over the top of us, ridging further northwards, but similar to the UKV, it's centred more southwards and eastwards, and it tries to pull an easterly flow in, but in the longer range into the middle of next week, the high pressure sat over the top of us, with a slack easterly further southwards, and you can see not particularly cold upper air temperatures, but chilly enough to be giving relatively cool temperatures in the day because of an inversion. However, in longer range, that high pressure tries to get shoved away, and it does come under strain from low pressure in the Atlantic and actually starts to put up a southerly wind towards the end of the run. Nothing spectacularly mild at this stage, but it would be keeping us very dry with sort of up and down to temperatures depending on the exact wind direction. Southwesterly would be relatively mild, more of a southeasterly or easterly would be relatively cool with a continental flow. So GEM definitely more of the high pressure over the top of us with lesser of an easterly flow, but definitely still nothing majorly mild or nothing majorly cold, really sort of in the middle around average for the time of year. If you look at the ECMWF, again, high pressure building over the top of us, ridging northwards and trying to build a slack easterly flow in, and it does it to a reasonable extent into the middle of next week with that high pressure coming around and the wind direction coming around that high pressure towards the southeast direction. In longer range, though, the high pressure stays over the top of us and eventually gets shoved out of the way, and we go into more of a westerly flow, but still a very muddled picture. You can see all the blues sort of scattered all over the place, so anything could really evolve from this position. If you do run it back and look at the upper air temperatures, you can see relatively cool air does get tried to push in, and you can see a lot of greens mixing in there. So again, indicating temperatures around freezing at 850 HPA, around average for the time of year, and again, under higher pressure, most likely will be colder than that because of an inversion. Now, if you do look at the ensembles, you'll be able to see the big shift that we have got now. Again, these are the latest GFS ensembles just rolling out. The 6 o'clock run has definitely shifted a lot milder, and you can see it is back towards average for the middle of next week. There are still a few anomalous runs, including the operational run there, still getting the -10 isotherm in, but that really is only 3, 4, or 5 ensemble members now, and not the majority like it was over the last couple of days, and even the midnight run. If we do have a look at that midnight run, look at that big bulk of ensemble members down towards that -5 to -10 region, very cold, and you'd suspect if you looked at this morning, you'd think a very cold spell was coming next week, but just shows you the GFS does have systematic issues when it comes to it. All the models do, and unfortunately this exact weather pattern, exact evolution of this has sort of shown up a bit of a flaw in the model in terms of over-amplifying the jet stream and well over-developing that Scandinavian high, not being able to sort of compute exactly what's going on over Scandinavia. That low pressure that's sat over Scandinavia controlling the cold air, not splitting in two like the GFS wants it to and thinks it will. In reality, it's not going to do that, and that's why we're seeing this big shift towards milder ensemble members. So back towards average, but if you look at the 2 meter temperatures, it is still turning cooler next week, back down towards sort of 5 to 7 degrees in the day and freezing overnight, and the dew points are still towards freezing, if not below freezing, indicating a cool continental flow. So yes, it is going to remain fairly chilly next week, but we're not going to be expecting any snow really, and it will generally just be overnight frosts and fog and coolish days, but should be still plenty of sunshine about. If you compare to the ECMWF ensemble members, which have been fairly consistent, you can see it is generally average, maybe slightly above average next week, in the foreseeable future around a degree above or below average from the majority of ensemble members. And again, precipitation does increase into the middle of February, but again, no huge signal indicating that it is still very uncertain. And again, you look at the sea level pressure, big high pressure building in, waning in the longer run, but of course that's going to happen with uncertainty. And the 2 meter temperatures into next week, you can see it is cooling down for a good 4 or 5 days, back down towards 5 or 6 degrees average, maybe slightly below average, and overnight temperatures there consistently down towards freezing or below freezing in London. So it will be cold next week, it will be chilly, but we're not expecting anything wintry now, and it will just be a slack easterly flow, nothing too crazy. GFS definitely disappointing many out there, including myself, who does enjoy a bit of snow. And of course, we're coming to the last month of winter now, so those opportunities for any snowfall are starting to wane. So it is a little bit disappointing that the GFS does produce something like that just to cancel it around 3 or 4 days out. But that is something you have to take into account for, and that's why we do have a look at multiple models in our videos, because of course if we did just look at the GFS in every video and exclude all of the other runs and ensemble members, over the last few days we would be thinking there was a guaranteed cold spell coming next week, which is completely not going to happen now. We have only been hinting at it the last few days, and we have remained fairly vigilant in saying exactly if they're going to see any cold weather. But it's just how these things do work out. It pretty much happens every year where we see some sort of cold spell cancelled. We saw it last Christmas, in Christmas of 2021, where we saw that cold spell that we thought was going to come off with northeasterly wind, and the high pressure just was nowhere near as strong as modelled from the majority of models in the end. And about 3 or 4 days out, the milder air won out, and the cold air that would have produced snow stayed about 50 miles to our northeast in the North Sea. And these sort of things just happen, and we will just have to keep evolving with it. Eventually, we'll get to a point where computer models will be a lot more accurate, but whenever they do get upgraded, they always do have some sort of bias. And in this situation, it seems as though this individual pattern has shown up a little bit of an error in the GFS model, which has produced some sort of very frustrating charts, which are not going to come off. So anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. It's still going to be cold next week, so do make sure you do stay wrapped up and warm, and it will be relatively frosty, so do stay safe out there. There will be ice issues, but I'll see you again for another video soon.